Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored by a video mentioning me from Sandman, the famous MGTOWist. He was sent a donation with a user question concerning me and some of the things I've said. My persona, MrCropper, on YouTube.
Hi everyone, Sandman here. This video is brought to you by a donation from Mr. Anonymous, and here's what he has to say. Hello Sandman, this is an Ayn Rand related topic. You've already made a video about Ayn Rand. You've also made a video rebutting Charles II, a nihilist disguising himself as an objectivist who lives in his parents' basement. You also made another video rebutting the global voice of objectivism, Yaron Brook, a materialistic global tradcon who recently moved into a gated condo in Puerto Rico to escape the IRS. A new guy has recently popped up now called MrCropper, and he's actually made a couple of videos about MGTOW. In my view, this guy is 1,000 times more rationalistic compared to the other two bozos, and therefore stands closer to Ayn Rand's philosophy.
Now, I'm afraid what he means by rationalistic is rational, because we mean rationalistic to mean divorced from reality, and rational to mean reason with reality, but they don't have the concept of that. So he may be saying that I'm more rational and therefore closer to Ayn Rand's philosophy. And I think the MGTOWists claim Ayn Rand as their intellectual basis or something like that.
He has made numerous points that
inspiration, their intellectual inspiration. All right, so I've made numerous points.
Show that he understands reality. For instance, the other two egalitarians are fooling the sheeple that they are objectivists that would actually never even admit the truth about IQ differences or between the genders.
Now, some of you are pretty excited about me taking seriously the IQ data, but I don't think that it has any real effect at the end of the day, so I don't see why they're so excited about it. I mean, look at North versus South Korea. What are you going to do with that? When you say IQ matters, then Korea should be better off in some way because of the higher IQ on average in their population. But it doesn't make any difference at all. The whole difference is made by whether or not you allow people to act on their own. Someone acting on their own with a low IQ does better for themselves than someone with a high IQ being bossed around by somebody else. So IQ doesn't matter. IQ doesn't matter. So I don't know why the objectivists won't admit that the evidence is there and true. If we admit the evidence is there and true, we can at least talk about what it means to us in reality. But they won't even admit that it's there and true, and they look like fools.
I only have a few apprehensions about him. But before I conclude my thoughts, I would appreciate your thoughts on this rebuttal video that he made that I'm actually attaching to this message. MGTOWs are decent, hardworking, honest men who are enslaved by most women in The Sims, and they actually have used their rational mind in order to achieve or pursue happiness via freedom and self-determination. How are they any different from the heroes in Ayn Rand's magnificent Atlas Shrugged, that was originally called The Strike? MGTOW is not a philosophy, in the same way that Galt's Gulch is not a philosophy either. MGTOW and the Gulch are similar, a reactionary movement against the oppressors of the mind. Why is Yaron's hideout in Puerto Rico any more rational? Objectivism is basically the philosophy that is behind MGTOW, the only philosophy out there that represents rational human beings striving for their own self-interest, with their ultimate goal being happiness. I say that if MGTOW is Neo from the Matrix, an object...
See, MGTOW has to get their intellectual muscle from objectivism because there's no other place to get intellectual muscle from. Everybody gets their intellectual muscle from objectivism because if you go out into the world with your theory, you'll meet an objectivist at some point and your theory will be demolished. So you take on objectivism, or as much of it as you're able to understand or comprehend, and you move forward with it. That is the world we live in today.
Activist MGTOW is Morpheus. Thanks in advance. Well, Mr. Anonymous, thanks for your donation and topic. But before I cover it, let me tell you about today's sponsor, me, the Sandman. If you want to get your hands on this Thought Tears mug, then visit my Teespring to rethink my...
Move forward a bit from there.
For sharing that video from MrCropper, it's got me to rethink my opinions about Ayn Rand.
So the Sandman is rethinking his opinions about Ayn Rand because of the things that I said in the video. I wonder what video it regards. Let me see. I don't think it's in his... Let me see. Maybe this is the one.
Because most people are not going to be philosophers.
Oh, it is. Okay, so he has a link in his video to my video. Good. That's good. I didn't even know. So beware MGTOW, wrecked by Ayn Rand's gynocentric philosophy objectivism. Sometimes I troll people with the titles of my video. Sometimes I troll objectivists with the titles of my video. Oh, okay, let's get back to the video.
I also put a link to that video in the description. Mr. Cropper says that because...
It's a shame that... Now this proves that listening to stuff only gets so deep, because this is the third or fourth time that I've listened to this video. I listened to it several times in order to get ready to do this reply, and I never heard him say there's a link to the video underneath. So this proves that if you read something, it gets into you much deeper than if you just listen.
And I also put a link to that video in the description. Mr. Cropper says that because Ayn Rand was a woman, that means her philosophy was or is gynocentric.
No, I wouldn't make that claim. Because she was a woman, her philosophy is gynocentric. No, I would say that life is gynocentric. I would say that women have vaginas, and men's job is to get access to vaginas. And that right there, that sentence right there is life. That's what life is. Women having the goods and men getting access to the goods. And the dance that goes on while that happens is what we call life.
He says that because all buildings are either built to house women or to impress younger women so that the men building them can sleep with them.
It's a slightly randy thought, isn't it? That either you're building the building for a woman, or you're building it so that you can build other stuff like your economic prowess so that you can impress women or make your woman happy or whatever. Now, you're going to find some exception where some guy wasn't married and he built a shop and lived his whole life and that was that. You know, fine. But think about, how true it is. Maybe it's not 100% true. Maybe you shouldn't hang your hat on it and call it your new philosophy. But think how true it is. How many buildings are built either for a woman or in order to raise one's status in society so that you can have more access to women or better women or something. It might only be 5% true.
Thus it means that all buildings are built as a form of worship to women. This makes perfect sense, and it makes me see Ayn Rand in a completely different light. I put together a God Among MGTOW video with her about 5 years ago now, and that was before I learned about the female chameleon and before I understood hypergamy completely the way that I do today. I now see her writing her fictional female characters as the woman that she wanted to be. Ayn Rand seemed to have written as though she wanted to be Dagny Taggart, a woman that was on the same level of intelligence as industrial men with tons of money, power, and status. It's almost as if that's what women really worship. Resources, material goods, and the men that can gather as many of them as possible are the prize. The woman is chasing the prize, and in Atlas Shrugged, Dagny gets her hands on more than one prize man for a while. She doesn't care if they're single or married. Rand is writing a hypergamous character, but in real life she had what I guess you might actually say a stable relationship with her artist husband, Frank. And
now, I just want to note, for any viewers who are interested in this, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. Now, you can say anything you want about him, but he still wrote the Declaration of Independence. There were lots of slave owners who slept with their slaves. So that cannot be the most important and salient thing about Thomas Jefferson. If you think that's the most important and salient thing about Thomas Jefferson, then you can't think properly. All right? There are more important things about Thomas Jefferson than that he had slaves and slept with them, which was true of many, many people. But there were not a lot of people who wrote the Declaration of Independence or did the other things that Jefferson did. So focus on what's meaningful and don't get distracted by the scattered leaves around that are of no value. All right, that's what I think when people are wondering about, well, what happened with Ayn Rand and this affair she had? I don't know. She was horny. Humans are horny. They do things. Sometimes they make bad decisions. And have you read her works and you want to think about her philosophy? Or are you just interested in like the very mundane and humdrum? Like, let's get down to the meat and potatoes of Thomas Jefferson. How many times did he have sex with Sally Hemings? Is that really what's important about Thomas Jefferson?
And while she never really did monkey branch from Frank, her husband, to other men, probably because there wasn't any no-fault divorce, I believe that she managed to have affairs with Nathaniel Brandon, a younger intellectual man which she deemed worthy of being her intellectual equal, an heir with regards to objectivism. I can now see so much more typical female behavior in Ayn Rand than I did back then when I actually made that original video about her. As for how MGTOWs and the industrialists in Galt's Gulch are similar, we've gone on strike from providing and protecting from women. The industrialists in Atlas Shrugged go on strike from humanity itself, however. They stop producing wealth for men, women, and children. They see that the economic game is rigged, much the same way the MGTOWs see the dating and marriage market is rigged too. So they simply walk away, and the society they abandoned, the society that forced them to work and think for free, tries to bring them back to their own version of the plantation.
Now, he's saying women are in control of the situation, I think. That women go out and try to get the best man for their liking. Women are in control of the situation. How much of society, how much of history has been a battle between the men who are trying to build a stable society and the women who are just trying to get what's best for them short term? I mean, this is sort of the view that it seems to me he's looking at it from. So that if it were up to women, we would just see women marrying the handsomest and richest men and being in harems, right? A woman would want to join the harem of a prince. And there would be this large area of poor, ugly men who never get to reproduce. And so men, in order to stop women from doing that, invented one-on-one monogamy. They invented the virtue of, whatever. I mean, is that how you see it? You see it because men also invent polygamy, don't they? I mean, so I just don't see the sex organs and our sex as being a reasonable way to look at history or philosophy or society. I mean, men going their own way, separate from women, is so confused because of these things I've just been showing you, that they have no way to conceive of the whole picture. Like, you conceive of the whole picture as women being aggressive or controlling or manipulative based on the power they have sexually, but men answer them in like. The only way to step out of all of this is to recognize reason as the way that we act, not sexuality as a primary. Reason has to be the primary. I think I'm sort of hitting on what is wrong with MGTOW. Sexuality is a primary in MGTOW, I think. And that's, MGTOW is a reaction. It's a reaction to the culture today. It's a small sliver reaction to a very small defined area of the culture. And I think it might be based on sexual misunderstanding or a misintegration around sexuality as the essence of human interaction. I think that's what MGTOW might be.
So they can harness their ingenuity once more. But with MGTOW, most guys aren't the brains behind industry, and aren't the dozens or hundreds of industrialists that left the world in Atlas Shrugged and let it all collapse. Men going their own way.
Men going their own way are what, just the regular Joes?
They are like a swarm. Society can't drag us all back to the plantation if enough of us walk away. They can't target us because we refuse to get married and have kids. Galt's Gulch in the book was actually a physical place that would have been targeted. But MGTOW Online is an idea which has been targeted many times before.
Now, what is the goal of men going their own way, though? What are you building? Like, what's your end goal? To stop having kids, stop marrying, so that, what? Your society collapses? That's weird.
and forums and YouTube channels have been taken down, but we always seem to manage to spring up someplace else. It's like playing whack-a-mole with men's sovereignty. There are generally no specific men that society can go after because, for the most part, we're anonymous, and we go about our business without people knowing what philosophy lives in our hearts. Mr. Anonymous, as far as I'm concerned, the philosophy of objectivism is actually American political and economic liberty dressed up in fancy pants.
No, you sort of got that a little backwards. The philosophy of American freedom fits inside of one corner of objectivism, is really the way that it goes. Objectivism isn't American freedom with fancy pants on. The fact is, American freedom didn't have enough philosophical meat to defend itself. And objectivism is the fleshing out of what the founding fathers had was just a skeleton, that they didn't really understand the anatomy of the whole thing. And Ayn Rand was able to flesh out the anatomy of the whole thing. She said the reason that these things are important is because the mind is how we live. That's her contribution.
You say that the ultimate goal is for humans to seek out their own self-interests and the goal of happiness.
Yeah, now I want to quote Aristotle from the Ethica Nicomachia, the Nicomachean Ethics. Quote, if there is some end of the things that we do, which we desire for its own sake, clearly this must be the good and the chief good. There is something which we desire for its own sake, and everything else points to that one thing. Now that is happiness. Aristotle proved it way back then. You can think of all the things that we think of as good. We can think of justice, we can think of peace, harmony, freedom. All of these things serve one end, and that is happiness. Now he's about to do some equivocation. He's going to hem and haw a little bit, and he's going to mention meaning, and he's going to mention Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson rings hollow because he doesn't say that happiness is the ultimate goal. Now, happiness might be a difficult goal. It might be difficult to understand how to be happy. That would require a good philosophy, and you ought to do good work to figure out how to be happy, and you ought to highly value any ideas which help in bringing happiness to you. Very highly value those ideas. But happiness has to be our end goal. There's really no way around that. If meaning is your end goal, then you want meaning because it brings you contentment. But you want contentment because happiness. Now, happiness broadly defined by Aristotle, he wanted to have a broader definition. He said happiness is not the joy of a single day. Happiness is the entire summer season being good. In other words, like a sparrow doesn't make a summer's day. Just because you see a bird flying around that is there in the summertime, only a summertime bird, doesn't make the summer by itself. And an instance of joy doesn't make a man happy. Just getting drunk or just doing something on one little occasion. That's not happiness, according to Aristotle. Happiness is a larger, lifelong thing. So, happiness is the only goal that you guys, any Jordan Peterson or anybody, can mention. Since Aristotle's proved it, nobody's been able to assail the position.
How is that any different than that part of the American Declaration of Independence that says that Americans seek life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Ayn Rand recognized American values which were being eroded by post-World War II politicians, socialists, and Marxists, and thus she repackaged them and sold them to a new generation of men as her own philosophy, which is in fact the philosophy of the Founding Fathers. She is to the Founding Fathers what Natalie Portman is to Thor. She grew up in the Soviet Union and her family lost her pharmacy business in St. Petersburg right after the Communist Revolution.
All right, so if Ayn Rand is just the Founding Fathers repackaged by Ayn Rand for a new generation, then she wouldn't have done any original intellectual work in her philosophy, but she did. Concept formation and measurement omission is original work, for sure. And a lot of her conceptions, conceiving as altruism being the primary evil ethically, I want to flesh that out by saying altruism comes automatically from being irrational, or being irrational automatically leads to altruism. I want to make that connection. But these are Ayn Rand's ideas. Yeah, she did a lot more than just say freedom and patriotism. She said, why freedom? Why is it that we are more successful if we get to work on our own for ourselves? Because the productivity in our lives comes from reason and rationality, from using our mind to figure out reality. We call that science. And that has a radical effect on our well-being. The difference between living in the jungle with no tools and living in a skyscraper in New York is radically different. And it all comes from using reason and using the mind to figure out reality, what we call science. And America is important in that way because it leaves a man free to do that. Nobody can stop him. As long as he's not hurting somebody, he can do whatever he wants, build trains or airplanes or whatever. So freedom's important, but it's important because reason is how we survive. And Ayn Rand is the first one who's been able to really make that connection. So she gets credit for that. She gets credit for a lot more than repackaging the Constitution of the United States.
The communists limited her ability to find a man that would actually provide and protect for her. And I'm sure that this anger she had towards the Communist Party fueled a desire for revenge against collectivists everywhere. She probably understood that women were all about the collective, and that's why she looked up to men and wanted to project herself as her equal. She was a great writer, but it took her 10 years to write Atlas Shrugged.
The women are all about the collective? They're not. Only if you look at them as a group. Any given individual woman's only about herself. She's about, if she has kids, she loves those kids more dearly than she loves kids from the next city or something like this. She is individualistic and desires for her own happiness to live her own life, each individual woman. Women are not about the collective. No woman is about any collective. They can't even conceive. They're of average intelligence. Unless a woman is of above average intelligence, she's not even going to be able to conceive of these conversations we're having right now. These conversations are only for above average intelligence people, right? The average intelligence person accepts the culture around them and doesn't think too critically about it and is doomed if that culture is bad, right? They can't step outside of it and think about it. And women tend to be of average intelligence. There are very few women. The bell curve in women is sharper to the middle. On men, it's more like this, and there are more stupid and smart men. But the bell curve on women is very sharp because you don't want, evolutionarily, you can't have stupid women raising kids. They'll kill their kids, or they're more likely to kill their kids. So women's intelligence is pushed towards the average. Plus, more women reproduce. I mean, virtually all women reproduce. Very, very few women don't reproduce. Compared to men, there is actually a fairly good chunk of men who never get laid. But virtually all women get laid. So maybe that tends to average out their intelligence over time more too. I don't know. But whatever, they're not a collective. And Ayn Rand didn't think of them as a collective. That's bizarre. You conceive of them as a collective, as an intellectual exercise. Actually, they are individuals. They are only individuals. Your idea of a collective is an intellectual exercise on your part.
So many of the themes line up perfectly with the American Revolution. As for MGTOW, it's actually based on objectivism, which, as I said, in turn was based off of the American and French revolutions. Rand must have just found a cool way to repackage it, much the same way that the creators of the Matrix franchise repackaged anime, Plato's Cave, and so many other amazing works of film, as well as graphic novels. Mr. Anonymous, you also say that MGTOW is technically Neo from the Matrix, while objectivism is Morpheus. But seeing as that the Declaration of Independence precedes both of those, then I guess that someone like Benjamin Franklin would probably be the architect from the Matrix. Remember that Neo and Morpheus were being manipulated, and the version of the truth they had wasn't complete.
I've never seen that show, Matrix, so I apologize if they are saying something that I should be answering. I really don't know what he's talking about.
There's a higher force behind it. I think that rage and the desire for revenge fueled Rand to create literature that was meant to inspire Americans to stand up to communism, which was sweeping across the world at the time. The idea that government bureaucrats...
So Ayn Rand was just anti-communist, right? No, Ayn Rand was anti-collectivism. She was anti-altruism. She was anti-individualism. Anything that was against individualism, Ayn Rand was against. She was pro-reason. If you're pro-reason, then you have to be pro-individualism because only individuals can reason. There's nobody else. So she was in favor of reality, and in reality you find individuals who can reason, and that's the base of her philosophy, is a reasoning individual. If that clarifies anything.
Cats, regardless of if they actually put restrictions on men that simply wanted to get married and have families, or industrialists trying to change the world, should be stopped. MGTOW is superior to objectivism because it's like going after your opponent by attacking them with 1,000 tiny paper cuts. A few paper cuts here and there don't make a difference, but in large...
So what are you cutting? Who are you cutting? MGTOW is 1,000 paper cuts against what? Against this false modern philosophy that has destroyed America, that's destroying our culture, which I think the gynocentrism, right, that MGTOW's on about. That's what's destroying. But what's the root of that? And what if you destroy it? What will come back in its place? Do you want to just go back to what was before feminism? You want to just go back to the 1940s? How are we going to move forward? Moving forward? What do you see as our way to move forward? I hate that moving forward cliche. But what are you planning to build? What are you going to replace it with once you've got your 1,000 cuts? And then he talks about objectivism being several bullets instead of 1,000 cuts. And the 1,000 cuts will kill somebody, but several bullets can be ricocheted by correct armor. To do what? To kill them so that you can do what? Now, at the end of the day, I offer freedom, and I say again and again, freedom is a bunch of people doing their own thing, and you're not going to like some of the stuff some of them are doing. Some of them are doing yoga, and some of them are going to strip clubs, some of them are drinking, some of them are studying, some of them can't read, others are writing books. Freedom's a mess. Freedom's got a large array of things going on in it. So a lot of people aren't going to like what happens in my society that I'm trying to build, which is just leave everybody alone and let them all do what they want to do, as long as they don't hurt each other. If they hurt each other, call the police. What are you trying to build? What are your 1,000 cuts against this gynocentric philosophy? If you're trying to build anything at all, then you're going to have to take a look at the bones behind Ayn Rand's philosophy, you know, the structure. Ayn Rand is not just a repackaged Constitution of the United States. Ayn Rand is a full philosophy which can give you the future to build on. But right now you're looking at it as 1,000 cuts against an enemy. But so what happens after the battle? Do you have no conception of the larger picture of what's going on?
Large numbers they do, and they can't be stopped. But the characters in Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged objectivist novel are more like a handful of bullets shot at your opponent. If one has the right body armor, those can actually be easily protected again.
So you say instead of sending Howard Rourke and John Galt and Hank Rearden, a handful of geniuses, MGTOW sends the swarm of everybody, right? All the men, 1,000 of them. Sends them to do what, though? You see, what's your larger conception of the picture? I mean, for John Galt, it was withdraw and let the parasites collapse and go back and rebuild when there's nothing, when they've collapsed or something like that. But don't let people feed off of you, right? Is that your larger conception, Ayn Rand's idea? Because if so, you're going to have to get comfy with Ayn Rand's whole philosophy. She's not just a repackaging of the American Constitution.
Plus, Galt's Gulch is actually an overt place that exists. MGTOW is inside every single man that follows the philosophy, so it's impossibly hard for the government to stomp it out. Especially in the United States, where...
Is MGTOW just Galt's Gulch inside the spirit of every man who wants a little piece of freedom?
Section 230 gives platforms immunity so long as they don't act like publishers. But going back to the video link you sent me, Mr. Anonymous, Brandon Cropper says that happiness is how to live in this world. The problem with being happy is that if you're...
Happiness isn't how to live. Reason is how to live. Happiness is the only possible goal that anybody has ever posited as the end of our action. Our action is aimed at something, and that something is happiness. So it's not the way to live. Reason is the way to live. Happiness is the only conceivable purpose for life.
Video link you sent me, Mr. Anonymous, Brandon Cropper says that happiness is how to live in this world. The problem with being happy is that if you're chasing it, you might actually get it for a short period of time.
That would be called joy, right? Some short term or thrill. So we have words for short term, but we need a word for the long term. We need a word for a man who has integrity, he's honest, he admits things that are true in reality over time. He doesn't evade, he doesn't try to hide from reality, he admits the facts of reality. We need a word for somebody who's confident and proud and honest over time. And the word is happy. The word is happy. It means an integrated, a guy who has it together. He's got it together. And somebody who isn't integrated over time, they're a mess, they're a jumble of different contradictions. We say he doesn't have it together. He's a mess, right? We say that guy's got it together. What we mean is somebody who over time admits reality, takes stock of reality, doesn't evade reality, lives according to reality, is honest about the facts of the world around them. That's what we mean by a happy person. Happiness is that state of living which is in accordance with reality, with the facts of reality.
But it never lasts, because the things that make you happy.
It doesn't last. We die, or we get the flu, or we get cancer, or we get in a car wreck, right? But as Ayn Rand said, happiness is like the punctuation at the end of a sentence or something. It's the high point of a song. The song has a background, it goes long, and then there's a crescendo. There's an orgasm. There's such a thing as an orgasm in the world. An orgasm's not just a sexual thing. There's a metaphorical orgasm, an emotional orgasm of happiness. Like when you work and work and work to get a building built, and then there's this one day when you're signing the papers, and then there's another amazing day when the shovel breaks ground, and there's another amazing day when the ribbon cutting, and these are punctuation points. So happiness is the symphony over the life of the person. Okay? Happiness is a larger, longer view of virtue. According to Aristotle, virtue is what good men do, which for them might have been good enough, and in a good culture it may be good enough. If good men are people who view their own interests as their primary concern, then viewing virtue as what good men do may be virtually sufficient. So that's what Aristotle posits, is that virtue over time leads to happiness.
Happy get boring after a while. Feeling content, however, is something entirely different. I wish that...
Why would you want to feel content? Because you're happy when you're content. So contentment is just a sloppy second-hand word for happiness. A content person is happy and doesn't need to do anything right now because they're content. I mean, that's just got a reflection of happiness. I mean, you're just sidestepping the word and you're not doing it in a robust way.
Brandon Cropper would actually have listened to Jordan Peterson, because he also says that happiness isn't something you can actually expect in life.
And I've listened to Jordan Peterson. If you're interested, you can go watch my video, Why Jordan Peterson is Wrong, or at least Incomplete. And you'll see that Jordan Peterson really doesn't have anything at the end of the day except he's recognizing just some mundane facts about reality. That's really all he's got. And so, yeah, I've listened to and absorbed Jordan Peterson, and he's correct as far as he goes. But he just doesn't have tools to see where he's at and where to go further. I mean, he's just saying, Jordan Peterson's saying, you've got to be honest about the facts of reality around you and try to live your best in the reality around you and stop ignoring the reality around you. Right? Isn't that Jordan Peterson in a nutshell? And he's right. He's right about that. But the reason that you should do that is because it serves your happiness.
If it happens, then great. But if your purpose in life is to be happy, your life will never be fully successful. Your purpose needs to be something with some sort of deeper spiritual, intellectual meaning.
Now, you are echoing a true concern. A man might consider himself happy, and you check with him in 5 years and he's miserable, right? Now, I take my view of that. Oh, I should mention Aristotle so I don't forget. Aristotle said you can't call a man happy until he's dead. Now, that's waiting a little bit long, in my view. I call myself happy any given moment that I review my life up to now. And I've done this since my mid-20s, probably. I've started looking at saying, if I died today, am I content with what's happened up to today? And what do I think my near future should be in order to make myself content, even more content with how I am? And I say to myself, well, I've written poems, and I understand this, and I made love to a beautiful woman. I could die today. So you consider yourself happy by looking at the context of the events in your life. It's an interesting question that you raise. When do you get to consider yourself happy? And I think that Aristotle went a little bit far by saying you don't get to consider a man happy until he's dead. Because there he is in his 40s enjoying life, and there he is in his 50s. His wealth has been taken away, his city's been invaded by a neighboring city, and he's a slave. And he dies a happy man? No, he didn't. He died a broken man. But he had a bit of happiness at one point in his life. Can we say that? It's an interesting question you raise, but I don't think it's too material. I evaluate myself. I say, if I died today, was I a happy man? Did I accomplish anything? Did I taste life? So not a material question that should largely affect your outlook on happiness. Happiness is the purpose of life.
Cropper also says something incredibly interesting that I've known to be true for the longest time. He says that religions are obsessed with sex to shut down or stunt the human mind, so we end up reproducing.
Oh no. Religions are obsessed with sex because they shut down the mind. The fact that triggers more production is interesting and might be one of the reasons that religions are so long-lived, because they're built of a system that makes people obsessed with sexuality, and that leads to reproduction. That's an interesting angle on it, which I'm happy to take on board and consider. I like the thought that goes in. But the reason people become obsessed with sex is because it shuts down the mind. Religion shuts down the mind. And you can't stop the sex organs from developing and becoming. They're going to develop and become. But you can stop the mind from really developing and becoming more powerful. You can stunt its growth and stop a person from really becoming more intelligent. But you can't stop the sex organs. Therefore, in a group of people who have taken on ideas that stop them from learning and thinking, the sex organs will tend to take over the scene. And they become obsessed with sexuality. Now, that leading to more babies being born, leading to more of these people in the world, makes sense. True, I didn't make that connection, but just to clarify what I said and where he tags that on, I can't take credit for that.
I've always seen religion as the opiate of the masses. It's a drug that takes your mind off of reality, so you function more on autopilot thanks to guilt. And you do those things which they suggest that you don't. Of course, for most of human history, if we didn't have religions, we didn't reproduce, as you're actually seeing now in the West. That's why I believe strongly that artificial wombs would probably mean the end of all religions.
To what extent does a system that shuts down the mind lead to reproduction? And to what extent does a system which fetishizes the mind stop reproduction? Interesting question. He says the West doesn't reproduce anymore. I don't think that's necessary. I don't think that follows necessarily. We have been a more productive society. I think the root reason there is the expense. It becomes expensive to have kids, and therefore people have less kids. I don't think that it's, I don't think it's very much deeper than that.
Because if you could use technology like that to have 10 kids, it wouldn't matter how many kids a family in the Middle East had. They could never catch up to your numbers. Cropper also says that all men are here in this world are here because men like to get some vagina. He's basically saying that if men aren't thirsty, then your society doesn't have a nursery.
That's just a carnal fact about reality. think about it, if all men were gay and didn't care about getting laid anymore with the opposite sex, the whole world would disappear in a generation, or in 50 or 100 years. Everybody would be gone. I mean, so it's only the men that are interested in sex with women that allow the species to move forward. We only move forward because men are obsessed with vagina. That's the only reason that the society, that humans exist at all.
Now have the technology to grow lambs to full maturity during the last 2 trimesters outside their mother's womb. We have millions of women having abortions. It wouldn't be that far-fetched to pay those women for live aborted fetuses and then pay other women to nurse those children after they're born through the artificial womb and raise them without any parents around. If it came down to it, the more people in Europe would rather be surrounded by indigenous European orphans grown in artificial wombs.
That's a dystopian vision. I can't say much about it except that it's a dystopian vision. Would it be better than importing people? I doubt it. I mean, the kids raised in daycares in Soviet Russia were not. They had terrible, terrible problems. But just surrogate mothers who aren't the kid's actual kid without actual DNA being shared. They just don't raise them the same as if it's their actual DNA.
Rather than Africans living under bridges in Paris like trolls, feasting on half-eaten bags of raw oatmeal. Just to wind things down, if MGTOW is really based on objectivism, and objectivism is based on good old-fashioned American liberty, then where did these values and ideas originally come from? They come from people like John Locke and Thomas Hobbes. I took a...
Hobbes? No! Locke, though, but Locke, yes, who comes from Aristotle. Locke is just Aristotle.
Class at university that red-pilled me on the nature of reality by also reading Jean-Jacques Rousseau, John Stuart Mill, and other Enlightenment thinkers. Ayn Rand is just building on the tradition, painting up her pony purple and calling it a horse of a different color. MGTOW is about...
Ayn Rand is much, much more than that. She's a much deeper philosophy with much more structure to it. And if you start asking the question of what do you want to build after you win this battle, who are you battling against, all those questions, you need a larger structure to understand it. And that is philosophy. Not that everybody has to understand philosophy, but if you want to, Ayn Rand's philosophy is there. You know, it makes sense and is there for you to study.
Men revolting against the social contract because it no longer suits us. To say that a woman gave way to our philosophy without actually looking at everything that came before her is not an honest analysis. By the way, when I actually took that class...
So there's more to MGTOW than just Ayn Rand's philosophy, you're saying, because she came from other stuff. Well, fair enough, she came from Aristotle. If you want to couch your movement of MGTOW in a larger sense than just you're fighting against gynocentric nonsense, postmodern gynocentric nonsense, what do you want after that? What are you going to do when you win? Was there something better before this? Do you want to go back to that? Why was that better? All these questions you have no way to address unless you have a wider philosophical structure. And Ayn Rand's objectivism is that structure. It is not just repackaged fancy pants, painted horse.
There was a girl that was obsessed with me and I was around the age of 21.
All right, he goes into some other stuff. I think we're done with yeah, and then the end of it is a bit of a commercial. There we are, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Sandman, for the video. I hope that clarifies a bit of my position, and I'm available for further comment.